Hey, welcome back to the All In podcast. This week I'm joined by Matt Comand. He is a high performance and leadership coach and the founder of Emergent. How's it going? And thanks for being here.
Yeah, no, it's going really well. And thanks very much for having me on. I'm excited to chat today.
Yeah, I'm really excited just from reading up on your stuff and what you do to really dive into two topics, which is resilience, as well as like being in the flow state or zone. I think those are two really interesting topics, and I'm sure we'll go beyond that. But for any athletes, entrepreneurs, anyone listening, those are just two things that always pique my curiosity. So I want to start off with, what do you define being in the zone or flow state? If those are two different things or the same thing, what do you define that as being? Like, how could you, I guess, a definition for that?
Sure. So they kind of are the same thing. First of all, the flow is kind of the scientific term or research term. The more like slang term is being in the zone. So,
right.
Very similar there. A definition, it's an optimal state of consciousness, characterized by engagement, high levels of absorption, present focus, and we feel at our best and we perform at our best. So those are kind of some things that characterize flow. A few other things happen typically when we're in the zone. Time is distorted somehow. Either it goes by really quickly, like 2 minutes goes by in 2 hours, kind of the time flies when you're having fun type of idea. Or on the other hand, everything happens in slow motion. So let's say you're, playing soccer, playing basketball, playing some sort of sport or doing something, and the players around you, the ball, everything seems to be in slow motion. You can make better reads, you can understand things better, and you're kind of like one step ahead. So that's another characteristic. And just, supreme confidence, everything's going right, a very decreased sense of self-consciousness. So often, maybe when we're playing sports or when we're giving a speech or, going for a job interview, we have that inner critic, or we have that person kind of talking in our head, wondering how we're doing. Oh, was that a good play or not? Are they going to be angry? Or are my teammates going to be angry with me? Was that a good answer to the question in the interview? So we have this self-consciousness, and that gets really basically eliminated when we're in flow. The self-evaluation piece just really totally disappears. And so that's really good for performance. Later on, it's always great to reflect, obviously, and evaluate how you did and things like that. But to do so in the moment of performance is really kind of destructive. And just kind of going with your instincts and leaning on your training and things like that is a much better way to go.
Yeah. And as a snowboarder, like the flow state and being in the zone is just massive. And I think that's a big conversation in action sports, right? Is how can you get into that flow state? And then there's also that there's a lot of talk that action sports almost just force you to get into that flow state because you can't be doing all this, self-critical thinking. Your life is on the line at some points and all the adrenaline is going and you just gotta like focus on the moment. And one thing that I remember from the times that I really recall in my mind of being in the zone or being in the flow state is that I can vividly go back and put myself in that moment versus there's other times in like my snowboard career that I can never like visualize or put myself back. Do you think that there's like some correlation there? I'm not an expert on this, but that those are the states that when we can consciously go back and like recall versus the states where we're just living through life and we have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, no, it's amazing that you said that. So when we're in the zone or in flow, certain things happen in our brain on both a biological level and a chemical level. Okay. So one of the things that happens is adrenaline is increased in our brain. So adrenaline kind of increases our alertness and our attention, physical and mental. So that's one thing that kind of heightens our attention and narrows our focus. So as you mentioned, when we're in extreme sports or snowboarding, for example, we can't really think about like what we're having for dinner that night because the task is so detail rich. Like the environment is so rich in detail that you have to pay attention to things to make good decisions and not get hurt, specifically in adventure sports. So that's one thing. Adrenaline heightens our alertness and narrows our focus. And then a neurochemical called acetylcholine actually kind of highlights relevant cues, relevant information, the most relevant stimuli in our environment, and kind of like tags it and for our brain, for lack of a better term, and basically marks it for later and says, that was important. Pay attention to that and remember that. So if we all think about examples when we were in the zone, the level of detail that we can recall, where the ball was, where we were in relation, how the sun was shining, which way our toes were turned, like literally the minute details come back to us so quickly because of that heightened alertness and then that heightened kind of highlighted stimuli or information in the environment. So it's funny that you say that, and you're exactly like bang on with the biology and chemistry behind it, because those are some things that happen when we're in flow.
So if an athlete can recall, if they can go back, or an entrepreneur, anyone can go back to these moments and really vividly recall these moments of high performance. And is that a good sign that they were in flow, so they can start thinking about what steps they took to get there?
Yes, exactly. I think, again, going back afterward and examining, when am I in flow? When do I kind of lose myself in the activity? When does time go by quickly? When am I totally engaged? And then kind of do that reverse engineering and say, okay, well, what was I doing? Who was I with? What was I paying attention to? What environment was I in? All those questions you can start to understand for you personally, what are the characteristics of personal flow. There's a few for everyone that are pretty consistent, but how you trigger them, I guess, and how you make them personal to yourself, I think would be a great way to go back and look at it.
Yeah, really cool. Because I think, just self-examination and self-awareness and going back, and that's a great tool for people, especially if they're just starting, they're just hearing this concept of flow state or the zone. If they can go back and think about, wait, there was times that I was in there, that can really help them resonate with the whole idea of it and why they might want to get into that state more. That being said, how can people get into the zone or into that flow state more, and why is it beneficial for them to be in that state?
Yeah, so I'll start with the benefits. I mean, there's lots of emerging research around how our brain actually changes when we're in flow and how we're able to recognize patterns more effectively. So, whatever, if we're playing a sport, if we're looking at business trends, if we're looking at, being an entrepreneur, whatever it may be, in our environment, there are typically patterns we need to recognize that can help us make better decisions, right? And words like anticipation and awareness and things like that come up specifically in sports. The other thing I think is in terms of being able to be in the present moment. So the more that we're in flow, we're able to kind of attune to the stimuli in our environment, and we're able to pay attention to that. And when we're in the present moment, we do our best work. And also, again, research shows anxiety can be decreased the more present we are, the more creative we are when we're in the present moment. And again, making those connections between two unrelated concepts, that's typically what creativity is, right? Bringing two things together. And again, when we're in flow, again, our certain parts of our brain, kind of flood with activity and collaboration, creativity, pattern recognition, all those things are massively amplified. And then there's some biological benefits too, increased quality of sleep, decreased stress, decreased cortisol, all a whole kind of array of biological benefits as well.
Oh, I'm so pumped you just ended with that, with talking about the biological benefits and specifically sleep, because the two podcasts ago from when this podcast is coming out for those listening, I did a podcast with my friend Liz Gledo, who's a two-time Olympian. And something we've been noticing over in 2020 that we were just talking on Instagram about was that we have super high REM sleep, and we cannot figure out why, especially when every article is about get more REM sleep, you should get more REM sleep. And then I found something that says like getting too much consistently, it could cause anxiety or so on, but it's just not normal, like per se, that, we're trying to look up, like, how can we get less REM? That's just not something that's out there. So we determined, basically, we recorded our whole thought process on this, and people can go back. I think it's episode 67, if anyone wants to go back to that one. And at the end, we said we were going to track 3 things against our REM sleep and our overall recovery. And I don't know if you know, like the Whoop band, I have one on here, but we both have that. So we're tracking that, and we're going to track the first one was time spent outside or in flow state.
Nice.
That was a huge one. And we determined the other ones were anxiety and decision fatigue. And then the last one was like voyeurism, just social media scroll time, not creating, but just like consuming content.
Sure.
So we were thinking that there might be this link. And of course, we're not experts. We like to listen to like neuroscience podcasts and things like that. But, from our knowledge, we were like, do you think that there's a correlation there with flow state? Because I was saying, me being outside cross-country skiing and just getting into the zone and not thinking about anything else, I found that those days I spend all my days outside or just snowboarding, my recovery and my sleep is different the next day. Could you talk about that correlation with sleep and the flow state? Because I'm just like so interested in this. And I think if anyone listened to that podcast, this could help them.
Sure. So it's great that you're taking on that project with your friend though, and reflecting in such a deliberate way. That's awesome. So the relationship between sleep and flow is actually kind of somewhat cyclical, where getting into flow states and being engaged and kind of losing ourselves in the activity can increase the quality of sleep. However, really high quality rest and recovery is absolutely essential to get into those flow states. So it's kind of a cycle that builds on each other. So, earlier we talked about attention and being, really alert and tuned into what's going on in your environment and reading patterns and changing stimuli and all that. Well, that's really hard to do when we're not well rested. And we can all think back to maybe high school or university when, we're not getting a lot of sleep and we're trying to pay attention in class, or trying to pay attention when we're overtired, overwhelmed, maybe burnt out. And one of the first things to go is our ability to pay attention and then retain what we've attempted to pay attention to. So that's drastically altered when we're low on sleep and not engaging in an active rest. So that's kind of what I would say around sleep and flow, is that they kind of build on each other, where it's very difficult to lose ourselves in the moment and be engaged and have these optimal states of consciousness when we're not making sleep and active rest a priority.
Right. Yeah, I think that goes for so many things. Like, you have high stress that causes you to stay up at night. You get bad sleep. Bad sleep causes higher stress, higher levels of cortisol, and it's just an endless loop. And it seems like a similar thing with these high performance states. So for us, we've been tracking almost the opposite way. So instead of like, how does our sleep affect our quality of the time, it's like, how does the quality of our day affect our sleep? Because we're specifically like, how can we get less REM, because we feel like we're getting a lot. And from what I know is like REM is basically like your therapy, like your problem solving and all that. So my thought process, and tell me if I'm totally off base or if you don't know, is that if I spent all this time outside in that flow state, then versus like, just being in a state of anxiety, figuring out problems all day, like just building problems in my head, that perhaps my REM sleep will decrease because I'm not in like that therapy mode when I'm sleeping. I had like a day where everything was just performed well and there's not too much to problem solve when I go back, to bed.
Yeah. So I'll start with this. I'll preface it with, I'm definitely not a sleep expert or know too much about it, but what you're saying makes sense in terms of giving your mind a bit of an outlet to think through problems, to be creative, to wonder, and wander. And then oftentimes when people have trouble sleeping, it's that they're overthinking, quote unquote, overthinking, and thinking about the past and the future are typically the two biggest distractions, right? When we're trying to sleep. What has happened in the past, maybe we're angry with a significant other or our boss, or we are angry with ourselves that we said something we didn't mean, or we weren't prepared enough for a job interview or something like that, or we're worried about what might happen in the future. So when we do give our mind those chances to wonder and be engaged, again, that kind of taps us into the present moment. And then that allows us to do the same when we're trying to fall asleep. There's also a neuroscientist named Andrew Huberman. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah, we're both, both of us who did the podcast. We're both big fans of Andrew Huberman, and he just released one on sleep. Yeah,
so he's outstanding. So any of your listeners, I'd highly recommend his podcast.
Yeah,
and he discusses briefly in one of his episodes how the sunlight literally affects our brain. And obviously, it sounds so obvious. But waking up and going to bed with the sun, which is not always possible in today's world, obviously, but understanding that by 11 at night or midnight, our evolution has programmed us to be asleep by then. And obviously now there's stuff on TV, our phones, there's so many things that can keep us up. And I would wager most people, it's maybe not like writing or doing a puzzle or reading or doing something like that. It's probably a lot more, like you said, kind of that mindless wandering on social media or Netflix or whatever, right? So, so that's definitely one thing to just be aware of. What time are we kind of shutting down, and what do we do like 30 to 60 minutes before bed? That might be something to examine as well. Obviously, we want to try to shut down any screen time and maybe have a bit more of a bedtime routine. And not just like brushing your teeth and getting in your PJs, but maybe doing yoga, doing some deep breathing, being a bit more deliberate about it.
Yeah, yeah. And I know before we hit record on this, I was telling you about how it was cold to -20 this morning, but how I went outside on my deck, and that's exactly why. Because since I listened to Andrew Huberman's stuff, I think he got interviewed by someone late last year, and that affected me in the sense of like I need to go and get sunlight in the morning. So I wake up before the sun rises. It's pretty easy to do in the wintertime. I meditate and all that, and then usually I finish that right when the sun's coming up. So it gives me that perfect opportunity now that it's light out to get that sun as the sun comes up. And I found that's incredibly helpful for like even just getting sleepy at the right time and resetting the circadian rhythm. And that's made a major change in my life. And what's funny is people forget that these things sound so simple, like the sun can really change something, like all these things, but we don't realize that our brains and like just our bodies are still like we have the same patterns as like millions of years ago. Like we're built that way. And all of a sudden now we have technology, social media, but we're not like built to adapt to that yet. Like we're still living like cavemen when it comes to our circuitry. So sure. I think that's kind of where flow state plays a role too. And that was our thought process is like flow state is almost like just being, like you're just in a state of being, right? And so it's just kind of primitive in a sense.
It is. And it's, I've had a question a couple of times, like, can adults do it better than kids or teenagers? So obviously as kids, they're, in the zone or in flow a lot more often. They're lost in play a lot of times. They're lost in, their numbers or their blocks or their coloring or whatever it is that they're doing. And they're very rarely are they like, oh man, I have to get up tomorrow morning. I hope I'm not tired. Where a lot of adults might think like that. Obviously, adults have a lot more responsibilities than kids. That goes without being said. But it also has to do with, as you mentioned, the development of the brain and our prefrontal cortex, which is the part kind of right behind our forehead. That's responsible for like forecasting and long-term decision-making, rational decision-making. And it doesn't really get formed to its extent until our early to mid-20s. So that's why kids and teenagers mostly, we can all maybe remember some decisions we made as teenagers that probably don't reflect a great decision long term, whether we're staying up late or we're doing things we shouldn't be doing or we're acting impulsive. And typically those behaviors decrease as we reach our, let's say our mid-20s, right? So that part of our brain develops through childhood and adolescence. And hopefully we're a lot more rational as we get older. However, hopefully, yeah, exactly. However, with that being said, that is also part of what makes it more difficult to be in flow as an adult because of that heightened, self-awareness, self-consciousness, planning, all of those things that the prefrontal cortex are responsible for. It's now fully developed, so we kind of have to work harder to shut it off.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, you see all the young kids coming up now in action sports, and even myself, like there was a different approach that I had then to snowboarding when I was competing then versus as I got older within the sport. Like I've been out of it now for over 5 years, but it's just so different. Like when you, like you said, maybe not having that reflection and not, I just feel like I was in flow more. I feel like I was a little bit more fearless, the decisions came easier. And then, as I started maturing, it was like, what could this do? This could end like this, or this could do this. And that really prevented from getting in that zone state. Is there any, specific exercises or things that people can do, like meditation or things that you recommend that help people get into the zone or at least train their brain to get into that state of mind easier?
Yeah, so I would start with mindfulness. And obviously that's become a lot more prevalent maybe in the last 5 or 10 years or so. And it might be new for a lot of people, but just experiment with it. Just try to understand or try to get a feel for what works for you. There's several different types of mindfulness. It doesn't have to be, 30 or 60 minutes sitting cross-legged, breathe. Like, it can be that, and that's very effective for people, but it can also be, maybe in shorter chunks. Maybe it's one song or 5 songs that you listen to for, 10 or 15 minutes, or even shorter, maybe 5 minutes. And you just reflect on your breathing, or pay attention to your breathing. And as your stomach rises and falls, and try to direct your attention to that, and try to direct your attention to that present moment. So again, being in flow, it's not only that, other things don't matter. It's that they don't even exist in that moment. Like, you're so focused on what you're doing that you lose track of time. You're not hungry. You don't have to, all those things just kind of disappear totally. So mindfulness can help us be in the present moment more often, and tap into our feelings, tap into our environment, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're smelling, all those details, as well as it can help us recognize when we're not in the present moment. So we can recognize now and create that space between, us and our awareness. It's
Right.
awareness of our awareness type of thing. So we can understand, oh, hey, I'm not focused on the soccer game right now, or the board meeting I'm in, or the Zoom meeting, or whatever it might be. My mind has wandered to what I'm doing for dinner, or the laundry I've got to do, or how my boss is a jerk, or whatever. And we can bring it back to the present moment. So it's kind of that twofold. It allows us to be more present, and also allows us to recognize when we're not.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that like mindfulness and self-awareness are like the basis to a lot of things when it comes to high performance and just, personal development and self-improvement. Because I think a lot of people, they may read a book and say, oh, I should do this or do this. And they just follow those things, but they've never dived into themselves to, like, one, be able to, have that mindfulness in the moment to recognize things as they're happening and then make decisions on them, or just even see them as what they are. And then also just know themselves and where to start from. So I'd love to dive into self-awareness and that whole concept, because I think it comes up a lot in talks about high performance. For me personally, it's something that it's a buzzword that I use all the time in so many conversations. One thing that I do notice, like, for example, if anyone's going on this journey of, they want to be a higher performer, but they might not have that self-awareness. And it might feel like critical to come at them and say, like, hey, you need to, work on knowing yourself, right? I think there's pushback there, especially if it comes from like a friend or family. How would you approach that? How do you approach that discussion where someone wants to get to this higher performance, but they haven't even dived within? How do you get them to even start that journey on their own?
So the first thing for my work with clients is developing a relationship with them, a trusting relationship. If we don't really know each other, and I don't know them, they don't trust me, it's hard to have those types of conversations. So focusing on, displaying empathy and active listening and all those things, I think can build that trust. And then from there, we really, it's a great question. I don't know if I ever really name it, like, I think you can benefit from more self-awareness. We would just start by examining some self-reflective questions and saying, when are you at your best? When are you not? What are your emotional triggers? If you examine the last maybe 5 or 10 times that you've lost your cool or become very frustrated, what happened 30 to 90 minutes prior to that? There's typically some events. And then is there a consistency there? Is there a pattern to that stress? Is there a pattern to those events? And then understanding how you experience stress. Certain people get very quiet and very resigned and introspective and, don't really do too much. And that's when they behave like that. That means they're stressed. Other people, as we know, maybe get very animated and very angry and loud and demonstrative and expressive, and then there's other people in the middle. So again, are you able to recognize in yourself some signals that say, whoa, I'm not who I want to be right now. I'm not in my zone. I'm not in my sweet spot. These are some signals that I want to look for. Right. And then, so that's kind of the barrier or the trigger discussion, I guess. And then it's, when are you at your best? Where's your attention to start with? And then, what are you feeling? What are you paying attention to? Who are you with? All those things. And then practicing our attention, being more deliberate with it and saying, okay, when the referee makes a bad call or when your boss chews you out in front of the team, yeah, it's not great, obviously, but we can be deliberate with our attention and focus back on our anchors, which is what we call them. The things that keep us centered and grounded, and direct our attention much more deliberately rather than kind of at the whim of our emotions.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like emotional regulation is such a big part of high performance, and just knowing those things that maybe tick us off or set us off to be reactive in certain ways, and trying to work through them. How do you approach that? How can people become more emotionally regulated so that they can just be better high performers, but also better like in their relationships and their life and their everything that they do?
Yeah, great question. So how we start with a lot of either athletes or corporate clients as well is understanding on a 1 to 10 scale of energy or of intensity. Let's say so 1 is very low, you're relaxed, you're very chill, you're kind of laid back, and 10 is very agitated, very pumped up, high level of energy. So I would ask the client, when you're at your best, when you're performing at your best, you're feeling it, everything's going well, where are you on that scale? Right. And really there's no wrong answer. It depending on the sport you play, the job you have, your personality, your boss or coach, the environment that you're in. Like there's really no wrong answer. Some people perform at their best when they're at a 2 or a 3, and some are at a 7 or an 8. Right. So or a 9 or 10 even. So just understanding where they are on that scale. And then again, recognizing the signals to be like, wow, I'm not in my sweet spot right now. I usually operate at a 6. I am way at a 10, or I'm at a 15. Right.
Yeah.
So that's, recognizing again, what's going on for you, behavior wise, emotion wise, thought wise in those moments, and then developing the skills to get you back in your sweet spot. So that's deliberate breathing. That's potentially mindfulness. That's imagery and visualization. We do an ABC, which is accept, breathe, and choose. So we accept what's going on, even though we may not like it. We take a couple deep breaths and we choose our response. And that's a bit of a reset routine. So there's all these tools that we build. And then again, depending on the person and their personality and things like that, they're able to pull on those tools if and when they need them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think like intention there is such an important word, as well as that space that you can create between your response. Essentially that's mindfulness right there. And I think that's important. I think not many people have built that. And I hope it's a conversation and something that, more people can do, because I think if we are more emotionally regulated, we're less likely to just have these intrusive thoughts or act upon whatever it is that could be negative to our performance or our relationships, or right, like if our boss says something and we react immediately, that could not go so well depending how that reaction is. Sure. Versus if we can take that pause and create that space there.
For sure. And yeah, that's a great point. And I would also mention that doing some preemptive work is always beneficial. So yes, responding to an emotional event is can be beneficial. We have these tools that we can use as an intervention in the moment, but prevention is always better than intervention, right? So, one of the first things we talk about with clients is their values. What are 3 or 4, maybe 5 values that they want to stand for in their life, that they want to represent, that they, when other people talk about them, they want these words to come up. Whether it's honesty, respect, hardworking, family, purpose, community, whatever your values are. And then having an awareness of this is what I want to dictate my behavior, not my emotions, right? A lot of us, obviously myself included, we're all human. At times, our emotions dictate our behaviors and our decisions. Yeah. When really, if we want to live more of an aligned life, or more of a meaningful life and a fulfilled life, having our values dictate our decisions and our behaviors is a good way to do that. Very difficult, obviously. It takes a lot of discipline.
It is hard.
But that's the way to go, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's like a lifelong journey, right? Like we are obviously the goal of being more mindful and being a high performer isn't to become a robot. So of course we're
Mhm.
still going to have our emotions, but it's just being able to create that space and dictate how we react to things, despite what that initial emotion is, and feeling it and recognizing it and seeing it. I want to go back to something that you said with the questions that you asked, based on like how you ask someone, you say based on this scale of your energy, where do you feel like you perform at your best at? And I think that's just a really important point to highlight, because you mentioned that it is different for everyone. And if people
Mhm.
just read a book on high performance and maybe it says at the level 7 energy, that's where you perform best. And so they're like, okay, let's level 7 energy every day. And then they're like, why isn't this working? They may give up on the whole pursuit of whatever they're trying to improve on when they haven't gone within themselves to ask themselves a question like, this is individual to me. What is the actual level that works best for me? So I think, if anyone has a chance to try to reflect in any way, that's really, really important. And developing that self-awareness that we've been talking about, I think it's just so key.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's exactly when you're working with a team or a business of some an organization, and you try to say this one size fits all. This is the only tool, or this is the best tool. That might fall on some deaf ears at times, where it's more, hey, we're going to build all sorts of tools and recognize that everybody's different. Everyone's coming from a different background, different experience level, different way of interacting with their environment. And then you can develop that comfort level with certain tools or not. And kind of, I always encourage people to work through the initial awkwardness at times, whether it's mindfulness or meditation or deep breathing, imagery, self-affirmations, like all these things that we talk about. Uh, Initially, there could be some awkwardness or some tension,
Right.
so I encourage people to fight through that, but then just find what works for them.
Yeah. I mean, self-awareness isn't an easy journey, right? Like you have to look
Mhm.
within, and that might make you realize that you were in the wrong on some things, or you have work to do, right? And that can be very difficult. But I think, like anything, you become more resilient to that process where you can start taking that feedback. And that leads into the topic of mental resilience, or maybe people know of mental toughness. And I think right now, more than ever, that's, a big topic, as people are still locked down, maybe their gyms are closed, and they're wondering how can they still have this like inner drive and the mental resilience and toughness to keep pushing on these things that they know will make them a high performer, despite changes externally that make it the environment maybe not as easy to do so. How can people do that, and how have you approached those conversations throughout this pandemic?
Yeah, so I think the place to start is kind of reframing or redefining what struggle means to us. And this is a
Mm.
conversation we have constantly, where we're kind of conditioned to think growing up that struggling or failing or making a mistake is really bad, right? And undesirable. And in some instances, sure. However, if we think about growing up in school or growing up playing sports, if we make a mistake, what typically happens? We either get criticized, we get punished. If we're playing sports, typically we get a decreased opportunity. We play less, or we don't make the team the next year, something like that. Where that, as I mentioned, conditions us to think, oh, mistakes are bad. I'm going to stay in my comfort zone, and I'm just going to try to do what I'm good at. And that's that, because I feel pretty good here. I feel safe here. A lot of people do that, and that's fine, living in your comfort zone, but it's not a great way to grow. It's not a
Yeah.
great way to get better. And as you mentioned, when we're faced with unpredictability and chaos and uncertainty, typically people like that respond to it in a pretty fragile way, let's say.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is reframe that idea of what struggle means. Struggling just means that we're missing something, or that we have room to grow, and a lot of times when we make a mistake, we have that negative self-talk. Oh, I don't belong here. I guess I'm not cut out for this. I'm not as good as so-and-so. We make up these stories in our minds, right? Versus approaching that struggle with a sense of curiosity and saying, what am I missing here?
Mm.
What can I learn? What are they doing that I'm not? So instead of being maybe jealous of a successful peer, being inspired by a successful peer, and reaching out and asking, what they're doing, things like that. So redefining that struggle is something, as I mentioned, we talk about constantly, and not attaching these like fake stories that we make up in our head that we're not good enough or anything like that. It's much more about learning. It's an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to challenge ourselves. I think confidence is really linked with that, where, the number one thing typically that every coach or parent has ever reached out about is confidence. Oh, my team doesn't play confident, or this athlete lost their confidence. How do we get it back? That type of thing. So I think a lot of us, and even, the definition of confidence is our ability to, the belief in our ability to complete a particular task or something like that. Right. But what we want to do is broad. That's very narrow.
Yeah.
Right. What, do I believe in my ability to complete this particular task in that particular way by this particular time frame? That's usually how we think of it. And if 2020 taught us nothing, it's that, challenges and goals very rarely present themselves in the way that we prepared for them. There's always uncertainty. There's always unpredictability. There's always more steps or a longer road we have to take. So kind of shifting again our mindset from, I'm confident in my ability to achieve to I'm confident in my ability to adapt and adjust. And whatever is thrown at me, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a new team I'm transitioning to, whether it's a new boss I've been assigned to, or a new department I've been reassigned to, whatever is going on externally, I believe in my ability to adjust to that rather than, achieve, goal X by such a date. Right. So broadening our perspective on confidence, I think, is always beneficial, and what confidence means to us. And then, as I mentioned, with the resilience, just broaden or redefining what struggle means.
I love that what you brought up about confidence, because that's something I say a lot. I say confidence isn't, knowing that you're not going to fail. It's knowing that you'll be okay regardless. And so that ability to adapt, I think, is so important and has really played out its importance over the last year for sure. As we've seen, and, times are tough, things are changing, they're outside of our control, but if we can just be confident that we'll be okay no matter what happens externally, I think that's like, the real definition of confidence, or at least the important part, right, to becoming more mentally resilient. And so something that you mentioned kind of related me back into the thought process on the growth mindset. And when you've said about like kind of, choosing or rethinking struggle in a sense, I think that a lot of people, they hear about the growth mindset, but they might not even realize that they're in a fixed mindset when you are in it. How can someone make this discovery for themselves that, oh my gosh, I am in this fixed mindset. I believe I can't do this, or I could never, or, jealous of this person instead of inspiration. How can they recognize that and start the steps of trying to build a growth mindset or make that switch?
Yeah. So I think honestly, it's a lot of what we've talked about already, which is self-awareness and those reflective questions, so understanding, what do I tell myself when I succeed? What do I tell myself when I fail? What do I tell myself when things are hard? And kind of recognizing that self-talk would be one thing, and even writing it out. And often what I've come to learn is working with clients, like in their mind, in the moment, they might say things like, you suck, or you don't belong, or you don't belong here. And exactly, taken out of context, they read it later on and they're like, that's really silly. Like, that's not true. I was just angry with myself. Right. Yeah. So we somehow rationalize this like negativity that we have. And then again, taken out of context, it's totally doesn't apply. So that would be one thing. And then I think growth mindset, obviously gets really a lot of play in high schools and growing up in different organizations, which it should. And I think pairing it with that curiosity. So again, hitting a plateau or struggling really doesn't have to mean a lot about what you are. It's not an evaluation on your skill set. It means that you're missing something. You just haven't learned something yet. So again, those open-ended questions, what am I missing? Is there more information I need to take on? How can I do this in a more well-rounded way? Questions like that. And questions like that, I think will help that process along. And then just removing permanence, what I mean by that is oftentimes we make like final assessments. Like, I've heard kids say for years, I suck at math. It's like, you're 12, man. Like, like you probably have a lot to learn maybe. And maybe you have more to learn than your peers in your grade, but you're 12 years old. Like you have a lot of room to grow. Or I hear it now with adults that I work with. Oh, I suck at public speaking. It's like, well, maybe you're not very good today, but your skill set of public speaking is not carved in stone, right? And even in the book Mindset, they talk about the word yet and how powerful that is. It's like, I'm not good at public speaking. It's like, well, no, you're not good at public speaking yet. Yeah. And that's not to say that we are glossing over weaknesses, or we're glossing over, areas that we need to improve on or anything like that. We're acknowledging them and saying, yeah, I'm not a good public speaker right now, but I know I can get better. I can improve. Am I going to be a national level on the debate team? Maybe not, but can I hold a meeting and can I engage with people in a facilitative way and things like that? Absolutely. So just catching ourselves when we're trying to make permanent assessments of ourselves or others. I've lots of coaches I've heard them say things like, oh, he can't play point guard. He doesn't see the court, right? She can't play center. She's a winger, right? Oh, that person can't handle large accounts, and they make this permanent assessment based on maybe one or two or three examples, versus what, especially if you're in your leadership position, what are we not offering them where they're missing the mark pretty consistently? I don't know about you, I've never met a performer in any domain that wants to do poorly on purpose.
No.
Right? So in my experience, if people are missing the mark kind of consistently, it's like, maybe something's going on outside of sport or outside of work. Maybe the environment's not meeting what they need. Maybe it's just not a right fit. That happens too, and changes need to be made. That's part of life at times. But this idea that, they're not motivated, they're lazy, they're a bad teammate, they're this, they're that, like those are lazy assessments. So trying to understand what's going on, under that superficial level, and trying to understand maybe what you're not offering them, versus what they need.
Yeah, I mean, a great example is Tom Brady went 199th draft pick. And they're like, you're skinny, he's out of shape, blah, blah, blah. And look what he went on to become, right? And so someone made a quick judgment. And obviously Tom had the growth mindset to say, you know what? Yeah, maybe I am these things right now in your view and your opinion, but I'm going to be the greatest quarterback of all time, and was able to go and make it happen. So I appreciate you sharing, especially on growth mindset and self-awareness, because I think a lot of people, they hear those words and they hear them in certain contexts, but they never hear like, okay, but how? They have that question of, okay, but like, how do I first start building that? How do I even realize that I'm not, self-aware, or I'm not this, right? And so I think curiosity and asking yourself as those questions, and as many questions as you can, really is a great basis. So appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I'd also, I think it's important to add in the room for self-compassion. Even though we're on this path of maybe self-awareness and we're trying to, meditate and do all this stuff, there's going to be days where maybe we do have an emotional reaction, or we do skip out on our mindfulness practice because we're tired and busy and running around, and that just happens. Like there's a difference between making excuses for ourselves and not holding ourselves accountable, and creating room for self-compassion. There are going to be down days, like we're all human beings. It's going to happen where we don't feel like training, or we don't feel like going to work, or we're not motivated, whatever. So creating room for that, and allowing room to maybe take one step back to take two steps forward, so to speak. So I think that's really important as well.
I really appreciate you sharing that. I had a conversation with someone, exactly about that. And I was saying, in this conversation, I was saying, for example, like love yourself who you are, but just, it doesn't, like you wanting to be better, or someone saying that you could achieve this doesn't mean that who you are is not enough now. It's just like, if you can make that self-improvement come from loving who you are in the moment, that just makes the process so much better. And I see it a lot, especially on social media. There's people who are like, against the self-love movement because I feel that it takes away from someone's, trying to lose weight because they're unhealthy or trying to build a better mindset. It's like, no. These things work together. And it's hard to navigate that, I think, especially nowadays with, in social media, you make a 15-second video and how do you motivate someone, but also let them know it's okay, whatever they're going through now. Right. And so I'm glad that you touched on that.
Yeah, no, I think, as you mentioned, it's such a difficult balance to strike where, on one hand, we're happy with where we are and we're satisfied. But on the other hand, it's like, we're not satisfied. We want to learn and we want to improve our skills and we want to get better. And often, at times there's a gap between like where we are and where we want to be. And that gap can be very frustrating and decrease motivation and be depressing in some ways even, So again, we want to recondition our mind as to, instead of lamenting, oh, I'm not where I want it to be, or I haven't lived up to what I thought I would be or something like that. It's using that gap to say, okay, how do I fill it? What knowledge do I need? What practice do I need? How do I use it in an applied setting? There are millions of people in the world who probably have filled that gap in this particular industry I'm trying to excel in. So can I reach out to them? Can I read? Can I consume, YouTube and things like that, where, that might get you on the right path. Obviously there's work that you would need to do on yourself, but getting yourself on the right path with some people who have maybe excelled in that industry before.
Yeah, there's a CrossFit athlete and his statement is happy but hungry. And I love that so much, right? Like he's happy in the moment but he's hungry for more. He wants to be the best and not to take away from his enjoyment of the present moment in any sense or who he is in that moment. So I absolutely love that. And one thing I want to quickly touch on here, because I know your business does this, is creating the optimal work environment. And I think this is really important for athletes who are forced to train at home right now, or entrepreneurs, individuals who are forced to, work at home and not have the same environment that they're used to. Just quickly, I guess, in a sense that anyone can understand, how can they create that environment to the best they can from home, from whatever they have, available to them now with the lockdowns?
Sure. So in terms of a team setting, the first thing is trying to maintain that social support. It's obviously more difficult now. We're not walking around the office and we're not, just touching base at the water cooler, so to speak. Yeah. But maintaining that social support and letting everyone know, hey, if you need anything, I'm always here, and keeping those lines of communication open. So I think that's one thing. And then asking their input, what do you need from me? If I'm, what resources can I offer you? If I'm in a leadership position and now you're at home, maybe, you're at home in a 1-bedroom apartment and you're single and it's all good. Okay. What do you need? Maybe you need a little bit of a break to get outside, Yeah. Okay, cool. Maybe another employee or another team member, they live in a house, but they've got 3 kids who are being homeschooled. Their spouse is also working from home. It's a disaster. It's chaotic. It's like, what do they need? Well, maybe they need, more, maybe they need some leeway in terms of meeting times or flexibility that way. So getting them involved in that process now, I think is important. I think making it very clear that we still value you as a person over your profits or a person over your performance, which sounds obvious. And I'm sure every organization is like, oh yeah, we do that for sure. But making it explicitly clear all the time that, you are much more important to us as a person than as a sales rep, for example, or as a marketing manager or whatever. Right. So, maybe putting incentives in place or putting programs in place that can help people work from home, that can, maybe if you had a gym at the office, maybe you give everyone a gym credit or send them, a piece of exercise equipment or something where they can maintain their health, or give them an exercise stipend or something like that, where they're still able to, live a healthy life rather than, maybe we have stand-up desks, but a lot of us are sitting at home, sitting down at the same desk every day, hunched over, not terribly healthy way to work. So, offering different programs that way might be effective too.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think from a leadership standpoint, that's great. And then from an individual perspective, probably you can just do the same things for yourself, right? Give yourself that extra empathy, that extra self-love, and just like understand that you're dealing with a lot of unknowns and different variables, but at the same time, still holding yourself to that improvement or that growth that you want to keep pushing on.
For sure. And another thing I would say is, I would hope most organizations, most teams have, a mission statement or a culture or different values, a purpose of some kind. And again, consistently communicating that and saying, okay, how can we still advance this purpose or live this mission statement from home? How can we still display gratitude, maybe if that's a value they hold? How can we still improve our community? How can we still have integrity working from home? So just opening those conversations. And if you're in a leadership position, like truly listening, not dominating the conversation as a lot of coaches and leaders often do, but creating space for people to kind of solve their own problems and understanding, okay, again, how can we continue to advance the cause of the organization when we're all separate? I think that's always a meaningful conversation, but can be a fun one as well.
Yeah, there's one thing I have learned is that you got to let people come to their own conclusions and figure things out on themselves rather than just telling them, right? There might be some resentment there. It's usually better if you can just empower others on how they can figure that stuff out on their own.
Yeah, no, it's kind of, it's funny you say that because it's so common, and it's kind of the potential maybe curse of being in a leadership position where, as a manager or as a coach or as a teacher, like we want to provide information. We want to provide resources. We want to prove our competence. We're the coach or the leader or the manager. We want to let people know that we know what we're doing. That's kind of human nature in a way, but it does have its drawbacks where there are moments, as you mentioned, eliciting information is much more effective than just providing information. So instead of telling someone something, it's like, what do you guys think? A simple question, as simple as it sounds, and then truly listening and within reason, implementing their suggestions or implementing their ideas. So I think organizations that don't have that space for honest conversations are going to be ones that maybe get a little stuck and don't innovate as well, or don't kind of move forward with the times changing and things like that, where, people might have ideas, but they feel like they might be reprimanded if they bring them up, or they might feel like they'd be ridiculed or something like that. They won't be listened to. And eventually they just stop putting their hand up in the meetings. Right. So that's not what we want to do. So truly and honestly creating space for your employees, I think is tremendously important.
Yeah, I think it applies sports teams, families, even like any situation where there's multiple people involved there is relevant. So I'd like to end things off with two questions. The first one is, what is one daily habit that is the biggest game changer in your life?
So in the last few months, I've tried to really have a daily mindfulness routine, and I would be lying if I said it's every single day. It's probably hopefully 4, 5, 6 days a week, where I literally take like one or two songs. It's honestly 5 minutes, and I lie down and I breathe, and I try to pay attention to my breath and try to let my mind wander at times, and kind of see that balance. And I just use it to recenter. I use it if I find I'm having a hectic day and I need to like separate a few events throughout my day. I use it then. I use it to calm down. So I typically try to do it when I wake up and before I go to bed. So awesome. and if I don't do it then, I probably do it in the early or the mid-afternoon, kind of that mid-afternoon kind of slump. We all get kind of tired after lunch type of thing. So that's one thing that I've tried to incorporate on a daily basis that I find is tremendously energizing, and it's not a huge strain on my day. Like I said, it's 5 to 10 minutes. So that would be one thing that I've tried to incorporate on a daily basis. That have really allowed me to experience some great benefits.
Yeah. I mean, I think like those days that you can really be mindful and that 5 minutes is like easy in a sense, you get a really great energy from it. But those days that it's hard, there's this huge long-term benefits of that because you're overcoming and building the reps of becoming more mindful. So, some people, they might say, oh, well, I can't get into meditation. I can't get into this, that zone. I'm like, that's good. Like that's building the reps. And so I think there's so much value short-term and long-term to even just taking 5 minutes for yourself. So I appreciate you sharing that. And then the last one, and I might try to shift this question a bit because so usually I ask people, if you're like 100 years old, looking back on your life, what do you want your legacy to be? And my last guest had a great point on legacy. Like ultimately, unless, even if you think about Shakespeare, this is an example he brought up, we just know, what do we actually know about him? We just know like those words that he left behind. So for many of us, it may be more important. It's like, what is your purpose? If you could look back, like what was your purpose? What did you accomplish? If you've accomplished everything that you wanted to, what would that look like to you?
Great question. So my organization's purpose, which I guess is my personal purpose, is to bring people together in pursuit of great challenges. So whether it's, I've been coaching hockey for 10 years, whether it's coaching hockey teams, we want to bring people together to feel like they're part of the team and to compete with each other and train and obviously with a pursuit of maybe, either team success, making the playoffs, maybe winning championships, things like that, but also personal success. They, a lot of them want to either play pro or get scholarships or things like this. So we're bringing people together to pursue great challenges. So that's the coaching aspect. And then even with the organization now with Emergent and the consulting that we do, whether it's with an organization or a sport organization or a private school or whatever it might be, again, we're bringing people together to do hard things. So if I can help galvanize people together and help them, get over adversity and find meaning in those things, and again, not only achieve difficult goals, but find meaning in pursuit of those goals, I think that would be something that I could probably be okay with on my deathbed, hopefully. So.
Awesome. I love that. And I think I'm going to continue to ask that question in this manner rather than just like before it was like, could you describe your legacy in one word, looking back? But I think this opens up so much more insight. So really appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's awesome that your organizational mission and purpose matches your personal, because I think that's businesses to start with a why. And I think that's where things are moving and where we have, social entrepreneurship where you're solving a bigger problem rather than just profits or whatever some businesses try to do. So appreciate you. Thank you for coming on. And where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, my pleasure for coming on. Thanks very much for having me. Our company is called Emergent. And the website is workwithemergent.com. Our Instagram is workwithemergent. So it's kind of the tagline that we use. And my email is matt@workwithemergent.com. So happy, check us out on Instagram, check us out on LinkedIn. And we try to throw some stories up and some links and different content so people can digest it easily on their own time. And people can reach out to us there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on. It was my pleasure to hear your stories and provided some insight for me and hopefully some insight for the listeners here.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Natalie.